Okay, so welcome back for our final session. We plan to finish by 3 o'clock. There are a few comments on the chat box about the New Economics Foundation. So that's something you can put into your Google search box and get more information about. You can also enter things like alternative economics, or you can put in Charles Eisenstein, Eisenstein, Charles Eisenstein, Sacred Economics, which is an extremely powerful read. So there's plenty of information out there on these ideas. What seems to be lacking is that creative energy of thought, perception, imagination, to begin to make these things happen in practice. There's one question here on the chat box which I want to respond to. As Catholics, this is from Esther, as Catholics, we are encouraged to spread the good news of the gospel. Are we perpetuating what has been described today as a construct? Now, that's an extremely good question, which again would require quite a lot of time to respond appropriately to it. You see, we've all been brought up with the idea, well, the four gospels are there, written by the four writers, and a lot of fundamentalist Christians believe they were more or less delivered straight from God into their heads, into their imaginations, exactly as they're written down. And of course, that was not the case at all. And we're not even sure if there were four original writers. But certainly what emerged within the first few Christian centuries were four dominant texts, which then did not become finalized until probably the end of the 300s and maybe the early 400s. And the person that eventually synchronized it all into four was Constantine. Not the bishops, but Constantine, in order to impose uniformity on the Roman Empire, or conformity rather. Now, in that intervening period, between the time of Jesus, or rather when the Gospels were first written, which was towards the end of the first century, and the end of the third of the 300s, those texts were edited over and over and over again. And it was the standard practice at the time, particularly in the Gospel of John, to put on the lips of a very holy person things you think he might have said, but there's no evidence necessarily for the fact that he did say them. And so, yeah, to call it a construct sounds very demeaning, but in fact, it's a more humble position to adopt. And then we need to discern, and don't worry, we're not going to lose the deeper truth here. By acknowledging what is the deeper truth and what are the core dimensions of our scriptures. And I would suggest the kingdom of God is the primary one. Then we're not going to dishonor the integrity or the truth of our gospels. We will come up with something quite different. And that's a major field of both research and discernment for now and for the times ahead of us. Okay, we have a few minutes. And again, I want to go back to the general group, particularly for people that didn't get a chance to speak earlier on. I think we can take one or two contributions, again, either from yourselves as individuals or in reference to material that may have come up in your discussion groups. So please feel free to come in, somebody, if you want to raise an issue.
I would. Hello.
Hello. Yes.
Yes. I was in Liberia for 10 years, and the young people didn't want to go into farming. They wanted to go into a nice office with a white shirt and nice central, not central heating, the opposite. And the same in Sierra Leone. How can we blame the multinationals for trying to develop big tracts of Africa when the young people don't want to do traditional farming?
Well, I think we're back, I suppose, to the basic issue of education. And you would know the scene yourself better than I would. How much of that is left over from colonial days? And the kind of idea that so many African people still buy into, and indeed people in other parts of the planet do too, that if we could all live at the standard of the West, then everything would be hunky-dory and we'd be all much more happy. And people don't seem to realize that, you know, if we all aimed for those kind of standards, we're not going to have any planet to live on in a short number of years. I met something very similar in the Philippines about 10 or 12 years ago from a group of teachers in a seminar that I was facilitating. And they were all into this idea of encouraging the children to study hard and work hard, because then they'd get good results and they'd be able to go off to Europe and get out to the Philippines and earn big money and have a lifestyle that would be much more congruent with what these teachers thought every human being should have. And I said it to them quite directly. I said, God's sake, do you realize what you're doing? Get another 10 or 20%, probably 10% will be enough, living like the rich West, and the planet will fall to pieces. It will totally disintegrate. It just can't do it. And so it's maybe helping people to get that bigger picture, but also not to get sucked in to the kind of indoctrination that so many people have inherited from the past. And in the case of Africa or Asia, this over glorification of the standards of the West. Yeah, it's consciousness and information and education that I think need to be invoked there.
And a little sideline to that, you came out against GMOs, genetically modified organisms. A lot of people say that these have enhanced taken away the poverty of a lot of people in the world, you know, where you have drought conditions and so on. Are they all bad, or?
Well, again, I think we have to do a careful discernment there. I'm sure some of them are good and some of them may be helpful. The problem I understand, and I've got this mainly from Canadian sources, is that if you use genetically modified seeds on one occasion, you have to sow them with a whole range of fertilizers, which then leave that patch of land basically infertile. In some cases for 10 years, and in more cases, we think for maybe 40 years. Those bits of land will not grow any other natural crops for at least 10 years. And that has been vividly shown, I know, in Canada, and as far as I know, in India as well. So now, again, let me not demonize everything. There may be corporations that are selling products, in this case, seeds, that maybe can be used, particularly for short-term addressing issues of poverty and hunger, and that do not leave long-term deleterious effects. But certainly the experience I know in Canada has been absolutely horrendous in this. And then when local farmers took them to court because these corporations claim they need to be treated the same as persons, in nearly all cases, the farmers lost and the corporations won. So there are very difficult issues there to be looked at. Okay, Alison, if you come in, please.
Yeah, it's Andrew. It was Alison before, but so
yeah.
it was me to comment this time.
Okay, Andrew.
Yeah, I think we were having a discussion in the break about what we're taking as a central message from this going forward. I know when in the little group that I was in, we touched a bit about how the church is changing, but also and had a discussion with Alison about the role of women in the church. And I think one thing that I really hear from this is that we need to be the change, really.
Okay.
And to step away from a clerical model is going to be much more effective, but there is certainly a need to address the balance. And I think thinking post-COVID, the fact that we're able to meet like this today and we're connecting with lots of different people, I think that's going to bring a lot of change in the church. There's been a lot more sort of discussions where we're not having to rely on, the CDF to tell us what to do. People are having discussions themselves and thinking, well, this is what we need to be doing. This is how we need to respond. So I feel quite hopeful, really, about sort of going forward. But I do think something I was thinking, I was picking up from you, we've got to sort of get on with that now. It's not going to come from the top down.
Right. Right.
We've got to let it grow from the bottom up now.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And I think that's where that whole notion of empowerment. By the way, I had a conference with Canadians a few weeks ago in which the women on the group did not particularly like that word empowerment and were looking for an alternative. And by all means, come up with an alternative if you feel you can. What I like about the word is that it very directly addresses the issue of the patriarchal power, which is what's crippling us and crippling many of our institutions that could otherwise be so empowering and fertile and animating and encouraging for us. So yeah, several years ago, I can't remember which one of these great anthropologists made the observation that in a more careful study of history and of major change, that it's forces from the ground up that really make the big difference. That there can be inspiring figures at the top, but unless they have really creative people that are also working from the ground up, the ideas from the top very often stay at the top and create a new elite, which makes things even worse. So I think, yeah, as a Christian people, we need to get on with it. The future is in our hands, and there's plenty of animation and inspiration from our Gospels, from our faith, to encourage us to do that. Just let me respond to this issue on the chat box. Could you say something about the idea that resurrection took place both before and after the death of Jesus? Yeah, absolutely. And that's maybe what I was trying to say earlier on, that if you look at resurrection as an empowering, profound, animating presence, it's there primarily in the life of Jesus and not merely what happens after the death, which is more where it flows into and translates into the people and the power of the people. And so going back to my earlier slide today, we saw those people that supported Jesus right through. And at the end, the authorities could only get him because they nabbed him in the dark of night when the crowds weren't supporting him. So already there, you had people's empowerment at work. And then we had it at work in the post-resurrection period, particularly in the group that I focused on earlier today. Now, I'm just going to respond very quickly to one or two of these questions and then begin wrapping it up. Is it not true that suicide rates in the developing world are higher? They are, and often it's because of that driven nature of comparing ourselves with the standards and the happiness of the West. In Zambia, traditional farming methods are being reintroduced because chemical fertilizers and sprays have destroyed the land. Yes, and I was in Zambia myself about 10 years ago when that issue arose. And the Jesuit Peter Henriot at the time made representation to the Zambian government. And to be fair to them, they did listen to him, not to be importing all these GMO crops. They did import some, I believe, and that's what they're dealing with the unfortunate aftermath of all that. Yes, Margaret Mead was the one that said, nothing as powerful as small groups and a movement that comes from the ground up. Thank you very much for all your questions and your comments. I probably have not done justice to them all, but at least I hope that I've offered a few extra ideas to support the ongoing animation and support and encouragement and that kind of affirmation that we all need and that we mutually need to give to one another, particularly in these difficult and challenging and inspiring times in which we live. I'm going to take 5 minutes to round things off, and then I'll be handing back to Rab for the last 5 minutes. So if you bear with me, I'm going to bring up a slide to speak to it, and then we'll be winding up at the end of that. No, why isn't this opening for me? Sorry, no, just give me one moment. See, can I rectify this problem again? It's not giving me the option to open up the slide, which is what I'm looking for.
think you need the view menu item.
And I can't get it. The writing on top is covering it. And
Sorry.
I can't get rid of that writing. It usually
Another
disappears. It usually
Another
disappears.
alternative is to go down to the bottom right. And if you see that little, keep going a little left, left, left. No, not that. Left. The next one.
Sorry.
No. Keep going right.
Keep going. Right.
See, just before the vertical, that one there.
Ah, good man. Thank you for that. Can everybody see the screen?
Yep.
Is that clear? Okay. I'm offering this particularly for those of us in the older age category. A woman spoke earlier on today about she being inside in a residential center. Because some of you may be feeling with all this enormously kind of proactive, out there stuff, in the difficult work of justice making, that it's not really something that you could buy into, or you just don't have the physical and health capacity to be able to do it. And so I want to offer this as a concluding reflection. That is not about that kind of action necessarily. It's about a quality of consciousness that will make the action different for a lot of people. And I'm offering you this example from China, of all places. Since 1996, members of an organization called Falun Gong, which was a group of lay people, a movement led by lay people, and focusing on non-violent meditation. So that's all they were doing. They were gathering in groups and meditating. Was banned in China in the late 1990s and into the present century. Its members arrested and disappeared. Many of them were disappeared. They were eliminated, if you like. But more frightening and disturbing, were hunted down by Chinese vigilantes in several other countries. And I was in Canada about 10 or 12 years ago when the news broke that the Canadian government had allowed these sharpshooters, really, from China to come into the country so that they could hunt down the members of the Falun Gong and eliminate them. Why does this mighty, powerful country feel so threatened by a simple group of ordinary people meditating? And the answer, I believe, is because of the kind of interiorization, the internalization, the focusing of energy that meditation creates changes the way people think and perceive. And that in time will change action. That in time might be the most powerful challenge of all that we can pose for any empire. And so in that light, I invite us to take on the ideas of today, even if you feel you can't do much about translating them into action. Let them become part of your consciousness, of your awareness. Action follows thought. Action follows perception. Perhaps at the end of the day, a regular meditation practice can change our world more powerfully than any of us think. And then my final slide, my concluding prayer from the slide I showed you earlier today. May our work for justice bring empowerment and liberation for all life on earth. Over to you, Rab.
Thanks. Before I hand over to my wise elder friend from the core group, Anne Havard, to say a formal thanks, I'd like to thank all the participants, everybody, for joining us today. It's been an incredibly powerful day, I think. Some of the things that came up in the chat relates back to sessions we had during our Lenten journey, thinking of Catherine Trebeck and Lorna Gould talking about the economic model. So what I thought I'd do is when we send out the recording of this retreat, we'll also include the recordings of the Lenten journey as well for those who would like to follow them up. So thanks to all the participants. And I now invite Anne Havard to say a few words.
Thank you, Rab. Well, Diarmuid, I'm sure I'm not the only one whose head is buzzing just now. From that very first image that you gave us of those two processions, which showed so powerfully the journey that we're all on, trying to move from one procession into the other. And then through the very powerful Stations of the Cross, and the way in which you opened up the significance of Holy Saturday for us, and the part that the women, the suppressed women, played in that. All these things are coming together at the moment in a blur. They all need time to reflect on them, to really think out what they mean for us. But the two words that struck out for me most, that came through everything you said, were empowerment and liberation. And it's not only your scholarship, but perhaps especially your deep understanding and your reflection and your prayer that we are most grateful for. And I'm very glad that we're having this retreat just before Holy Week starts, because that gives us time to reflect on some of these many things that you've said to us and to make them a reality. And so now, as a suppressed woman, perhaps on behalf of everyone here, women and men, I offer you our very, very grateful thanks. The words are not really adequate, but believe me, they come with a very sincere heart. So thank you, Diarmuid.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much.